But first, let's do a real quick recap. What we've learned so far from Reverend David, the first Sunday, he told us about the thing itself. And he said that spirit is one, absolute, self-existent, indestructible cause, self-existent cause. We know that spirit is one, from which nothing can be excluded, from which nothing can be added. You know, the founder of this philosophy, Ernest Holmes, he did say, advance the slide for me. He said, we think of God as not some power, but as all power. Not as some presence, but the only presence. Not merely as a God, but as the God, the only causation to all things. This is the thing itself. And on the second Sunday, Reverend David discussed the way it works. And he said, spirit, the thing itself, operates or thinks into a universal law. And the law is always subjective to spirit's thoughts and acts upon those thoughts to bring forth manifestation, effect, in accordance with the thought. In other words, that which spirit thinks about, it brings about into creation through universal law. Now, law is subjective to spirit's thoughts and receives and acts upon the thoughts that spirit thinks. The reason the law is called subjective is because it is subjective to whatever thought is impressed upon it. It is always receptive to spirit's objective thoughts. This is the way it works. And the Declaration of Principles, next slide, please. Ernest Holmes said that the universal spirit, which is God, operates through a universal mind, which is the law of God, and that we are surrounded by this creative mind, this law, which receives the direct impress of our thoughts and acts upon it. Now that's the recap of the thing itself and the way it works. And this Sunday, we will continue with what it does. And what it does is creates out of itself and brings forth the entire body of creation. In the Declaration of Principles, it continues and says that the manifest universe is the body of God. It is the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. Spirit thinks, the law receives that thought, and creation is brought forth. This is what it does. This is the creative process. Now, Ernest Holmes so many times has said he didn't come up with anything original. The science of mind philosophy is not original to him. Instead, he's like a master DJ synthesizing and bringing all of the ancient verities together. He brings universal principles to a practical and usable format. And so he developed a scientific method for us to understand, and he called it the creative process. And he presented it in a way that if we were to follow his guidance, it would lead to a conscious, whole, and loving life. The basics of what it does is that spirit takes an invisible idea and makes it visible. And so do we. We enact what it does in our lives. All of humanity enacts the creative process within our own thoughts, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. And we make use of the same universal law that God uses. It is our individualized use of it through our subconscious mind. Now, this universal law has been called so many things in the Science of Mind book. When I became a practitioner and started studying it, I'm like, which is it now? You just called it universal law. You just called it creative medium. You called it universal subjectivity, universal mind. And it can get very confusing. But I just want you to remember that there is but one mental law in the universe. And where we use it, it becomes our law because we individualize it. And just as Spirit's conscious objective thoughts impresses upon the universal law, so do our thoughts impress on our individual use of this very law. As I said before, we are always using the creative process, but mostly we are ignorant of how our predominant thought patterns become things in our lives. So it's by learning what creative process is and how it operates in our lives that leads us to a better understanding of the spiritual laws of life, so we can use this creative process constructively for fuller, happier lives. Spirit wants us to live here and now, and to express it fully with love and joy and success and prosperity. It is through Spirit's eternal givingness of itself, in and through and as all creation, but especially us, that it individualizes and expresses. And as we become more aware of this, we come into a greater understanding that we are connected to all that there is. Now, if you have been a metaphysician for any time, and even if you are new to this philosophy, you probably have heard the analogy of the creative process akin to planting a seed in the soil. Let's advance the next slide. A plant, a seed, is a thought. That is the top level that you see here. The thing itself, universal conscious mind, remember, you use this too. Our thought, spirit thoughts, that's the conscious aspect of it. We plant that seed in the soil. The next slide. That creative law receives our thought and acts upon it without fail and always. It cannot say, no, that's not a good idea. No, you really don't want a red Corvette. You like your Kia Soul. No, you don't want that, Gene. No, it doesn't argue. It is receptive always. And there's so many things up here, but I just want you to remember the seed, the thought, goes into the soul. And what comes next? Next slide. A plant. The form, the manifestation, the red Corvette. The next slide. I just want you to see, this is a better image maybe for some of us to digest, because that chart can get really busy sometimes. You take that seed, that thought, you plant it into the soil, and manifestation of plants comes forth. And we do this through our subconscious mind, which is our individual use of that creative process. Now, I want you to know that I've always grappled with this. Ernest said, all thought is creative. And I'm like, no, it's not. But It is. And he prefaces it with, according to the nature, the impulse. What is an impulse? It's a strong urge or desire, emotion or conviction behind the thought. You know, and thank goodness for this, because I probably would have a unicorn, a Lamborghini, and a couple of other things that I wouldn't be able to return back. And I'm sure you too would have the same things. All kinds of crazy things would be popping up. So let's be clear. Thought plus emotion equals belief. It is our predominant thought patterns that create. Go back to the previous slide. Now, this I took from the Science of Mind book on page 568, 69, and 70. There are several different charts. And I made it as simplistic as possible. But how can you make universal law, that's something that the infinite uses, simplistic? Well, I think Ernest did a good job. And, you know, I didn't do too bad of a job either. It was kind of hard putting those words up in there. But when you think about it, your thought descends into the creative medium. And that creative medium, if you truly believe and you have faith in it and you have conviction in it, then it produces the results of the thing that you desire and want manifested in your life. And the circle, Ernest Holmes tells us, represents infinity. You can't contain spirit, something that is immanent and transcendent, but I think he did a good job. Let me just say this again. Thought plus emotion equals belief. It is done unto us as we believe. It is not necessarily done unto us as we think or as we feel, but put those two together, and what is the result is a dynamic powerhouse, a creative force. But there is only one mind. Now, there's two aspects of that mind, which is conscious and subconscious. And we use them every time. And they are active every time. So when we bring ourselves to realize that our ideas and our feelings about them are already an established fact, when they are still in mind and have faith and conviction that those established facts will come forth in appearance before they even do, well, at that point in time, you will have achieved mastery in this creative process. Well, but to achieve this, first we have to practice thinking about what we prefer instead of what we do not prefer. This may be a new behavior for some of us. I know it was for me. Many of us were taught to think about our problems over and over and over again, like that was going to bring forth a solution. But it does not. We have to break from the habit of those conditional thought patterns that have been already planted. And I just love the way Reverend David said last Sunday. He said, you can have a new thought today. You can have two new thoughts about the same thing. Maybe 2 days you can have a thought. But you have been using this creative process for days and months and years, and you have set this creative process into motion already, and you're wondering why things are cropping up. I'm not thinking that way anymore. That's now how I'm thinking. But you set it in motion, and those plants and those weeds are following you. However, as you begin to think anew, constantly, consistently with our spiritual practices, you begin to plant new ideas in the law of mind. And these ideas that are life-affirming and loving and in alignment with your highest good are more powerful than any negative thought patterns, any weeds that you've already planted before. Next slide. Ernest says in The Science of Mind, thought which is built upon the realization of the divine presence has the power to neutralize negative thought, to erase it, just as light has the power to overcome darkness, not by combating darkness, but by being exactly what it is, light. So every day we begin with our spiritual practice of affirmative prayer, meditation, and visioning. Every day we get to choose a new and dwell on that which is a realization of divine presence in all of its verities. And as we strengthen our spiritual practices, and we apply this creative process, we come into a greater awareness of spirit, individualizing not only just through us, but through all creation. Because it is spirit's nature to create and express in creation, including us. Because with spirit, it is always moving forward into divine expression. And we are its outlets of this divine urge. We are the outlets of its expression. So if we would just for a minute get our small and sometimes petty preferences out of the way of this divine urge, of its creativity that wills out through us and as us, oh, what an amazing thing it could bring forth. And as outlets, we are and eternally will be in relationship with spirit. And now that we know what it does and what we do, we can no longer claim ignorance of our role to ourselves or to each other, or our role in the universal scheme of things. Ernest said some 68 years ago in Asilomar that our philosophy and its spiritual principles was a secret that should not be a secret. It should be shared. He said, next slide, we are not concerned with what pleases philosophy, theology, religion, science, or anybody else. If it is true, we must dehypnotize the self first. This is where we start. He said this is where we start, not where we end. He said psychology says the first adjustment is to the self, the next to the family, the third to society, and the fourth to the universe. And we are not whole until we have made the adjustments. We are not whole until we have made the adjustments. Otherwise, you know how you have to go to the chiropractor every now and again? And you're like, okay, it's out of place again. I need that adjustment so you can stand upright and so you can move forward. Because why? The current paradigm in which we live wants us to stay ignorant and not know these principles, not have dominion over our own mind and lives, not know what the ancients have taught, as within, so without, not know anything about how this creative process works and how we are always enacting it in our lives and out into the world. But what it wants you to do is to continue to worship something that is outside of yourself, some gigantic sky daddy that needs to be begged to, needs to be worshiped to. Anything, money, anything, sex, anything that is not, and now don't get me wrong, I like money. I do like sex. I like all those things, I do. But it is not your God. It is not. I want you to wait for your blessings until the afterlife. Even in this philosophy, there are those that are mainly focused on the individualized self, I'm not going to worry about those. They need to come into and learn this philosophy and learn how to manifest in order to get things. And they will turn a blind eye to the pain and the suffering of everyone. But let me tell you, there is no other. We are all that there is. It is only us. It is only the thing itself doing what it does through creation, in creation, and as the creation. I am that I am. I am that I am. That's all it is. Every person that has ever felt the indwelling presence and that fire and that all-consuming love and who truly understood that spirit is all that there is has never stopped at just freeing themselves. Harriet Tubman never stopped at just freeing themselves. Martin Luther King, Gandhi never stopped at just freeing themselves from the murk of this illusion that there is an otherness or a separation and that we should only fend for ourselves. No, all lovers of humanity, all the kings, the Gandhis, the Malalas, the Nadia Murads, the Greta Thunbergs, all of them, when they heard that inner voice within them that urged them to move out into the world and to speak the truth, that all people, all marginalized people should be set free and have the same rights that they do, the privilege does. Everybody is the one thing going on here, the Spirit of the living God. Those who are persecuted, those who are labeled, the animal kingdoms, the rivers, the air, everything is a divine expression of the living Spirit. Ooh, and we, as it, should protect it all. Why? Because everybody and everything is part of the one, and we are all interconnected with one another and the thing itself. So, what is ours to do now that we know about our relationship to the thing itself, the way it works, and what it does? Well, that's going to look different for everybody. For some, it's outreach, helping the poor, feeding the poor, helping the disenfranchised, helping the unhoused. For some, it's human rights, it's gay rights, it's LGBTQIA+, A2. For some, it's social justice and social equality, environmental rights and protections and animal rights, all the rights. Philanthropy, for me, it's ministry and spiritual counseling and healing. And with all the ways that we shine our light out into the world, we can use these principles as a guiding beacon and a stabilizing foundation to consciously create change in our lives and in our world. But keeping these science of mind principles a secret is no longer a viable option.